Ever find yourself standing in a supposedly amazing place wondering, what's all the hype about?
Happens to the best of us.
Today we're diving into those overrated destinations, those places that often fall short of the hype.
We'll figure out why those expectations don't always match reality.
And more importantly, how to avoid those travel traps. Our guide for this journey is travel expert Mark Walters of Walters World. He's known for his, let's say, candid takes on travel,
That's putting it mildly. He doesn't sugarcoat it.
which is why we love him.
Heh.
So let's jump right in. Mark did not hold back on Aruba, calling it New England throwing up on a Caribbean island.
High prices.
Familiar chain restaurants.
Ouch.
Not exactly the exotic escape some envision. What do you make of that comparison? Is Aruba really just a Caribbean mirage?
It's a bold statement. Aruba's location outside the hurricane belt definitely makes it popular, especially for travelers who prioritize predictable weather. But yeah, cultural immersion isn't really its strong suit.
He did mention those beaches, though, right? Those famous beaches.
Right. But he argues those beaches aren't anything special if you're coming from, say, the west coast of the U.S. And if you go, be careful on the east coast, as the water there can be rough.
Good tip.
He suggests Jamaica if someone wants a mix of culture and adventure, or Turks and Caicos for pure relaxation.
Matching the destination to your travel style. I like that. Okay, let's shift gears from beaches to cityscapes. Mark raved about Vancouver's natural beauty. The whale watching? Stanley Park, but the city itself? Not so much.
Vancouver's a perfect example of how media can really shape our expectations. All those HGTV shows and Hallmark movies filmed there create this idyllic picture, but it's not the whole story.
And he wasn't a fan of the architecture either, all that modern stuff. He actually prefers Seattle. Can you believe that? Found it more dynamic, and of course the cost of living is a factor too.
Yeah, both cities have that Pacific Northwest vibe, but Seattle has this grittier, more independent energy, appeals to a different kind of traveler.
It's amazing how our expectations going in can totally color our experiences. Speaking of big cities that might not live up to the hype, Mark had some interesting thoughts on Sao Paulo, Brazil. And this is coming from someone who actually lives there.
It's funny, people hear Brazil and they immediately think Rio de Janeiro or Carnival. Sao Paulo is a completely different animal. It's this massive, sprawling megacity.
Not exactly geared toward tourists.
It's a hub for finance, fashion, food, but yeah, not really a top tourist destination.
He suggests exploring other regions for a more, well, traditionally Brazilian experience.
He mentioned Bahia for beaches, Minas Gerais for history buffs, and the Pantanal region for nature lovers.
So much variety.
It's a good reminder that Brazil is incredibly diverse, and Sao Paulo, while a dynamic city, doesn't represent the whole picture.
Do your research, folks. Don't just go by what's trending on Instagram.
Yeah.
Okay, on to a destination that practically screams luxury Dubai. Mark was very upfront about not being a fan. Found it a bit, soulless with all the steel and glass skyscrapers.
Yeah.
Why do you think he feels that way?
Well, Dubai's appeal is all about modern extravagance, luxury shopping, futuristic architecture, over-the-top experiences. If you're looking for cultural immersion or historical sites, it's not really the place.
He'd rather, and I quote, ride a camel in a place with more soul.
He's all about authenticity.
He even joked that Dubai is for people with a lot of money and a love for indoor activities.
To each their own, right. It all comes down to what you're looking for in a travel experience. Some people thrive on that modern, extravagant vibe. Others crave something, well, deeper.
Speaking of destinations that are often hyped up for a specific type of traveler, Mark had a lot to say about Orlando, Florida, to put it mildly.
Let me guess, not a fan of Disney World.
He basically called it swampland they built Disney World on.
Well, he's not wrong about the geography, and then there's the traffic and the expense that comes with the whole theme park experience, which can be a lot for some people.
Theme parks, especially Disney, are marketed as these once-in-a-lifetime trips. Do you think that lives up to the hype?
It depends. Those parks do create a certain magic, especially for families with young kids. But there are definitely other ways to experience Florida. He suggests if you do Disney, maximize your time on the property and then head to Clearwater Beach or Miami for a completely different vibe.
Yeah, you get the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Okay, Mark also had some advice about destinations that are always being compared to more famous counterparts. You know, those places that get called the next big thing or the Paris of or the Venice of. He says, watch out.
Those comparisons set people up for disappointment. Imagine going to a city dubbed the next Silicon Valley. It's never going to live up to that hype.
Right.
Every destination deserves to be judged on its own merits, not on how closely it resembles somewhere else.
So true. Embrace the unique. He also points out another overrated trap. When a once charming destination gets ruined by its own popularity. Sadly, he feels like Dublin, Ireland, has become a victim of this.
That's the unfortunate downside of tourism, isn't it? It can be great for local economies, but too much of a good thing.
It backfires.
Crowds, inflated prices, and you lose that authentic experience that probably drew people there in the first place.
He seemed especially heartbroken about Dublin. Found it overwhelming, with high prices, tourist traps, the whole 9 yards.
It really is a shame when a destination kind of loses its charm because it gets too popular. Makes you think, like, how can we be more mindful travelers? How can we,
That's the big question. And honestly, probably a topic for a whole other deep dive.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think his point is that we should be aware of how our travel choices impact the places we visit. And, speaking of impact, he also made an interesting point about how all the media attention can really inflate a city's reputation. Like it ends up being more famous than it deserves. He used Brussels as an example.
Oh, interesting. What do you say?
He said because it's always in the news, being the unofficial capital of the European Union and all that, the expectations get kind of skewed.
Yeah, people have these grand ideas about what it's going to be like.
Exactly. He even joked that if people just thought of it as like a big city in Belgium with some decent museums, they'd probably enjoy it more.
It's so true. Sometimes I feel like we build these places up in our minds so much that there's no way they can live up to it.
It's like that band, that everybody loves, then they get too big. And then suddenly it's not cool to be a fan anymore.
Exactly. Overexposure can ruin a destination, It loses that unique thing that made it special in the first place. Speaking of, I gotta ask, what do you think about his mannequin pests comment?
Oh, you mean the one about it being a tiny statue of somebody peeing?
Yeah.
Well, gotta love Mark, right? He tells it like it is. He's not going to sugarcoat anything.
That's for sure. But he did also make a good point about, like, looking beyond the big tourist traps, right?
Yeah.
It's often those unexpected, less hyped experiences that you really remember, the ones you stumble upon when you're not even looking.
Totally agree. So I'm curious, were there any destinations he mentioned that you've actually been to and loved? Places you think deserve the hype?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'm with him on Jamaica. That place is incredible. So much to offer. The history, the music, the food, the natural beauty. It's just got this energy,
You're making me hungry just thinking about it. All that delicious jerk chicken.
Seriously, the best.
Wow.
But, it's like, that's what I love about travel, right? It just sparks this sense of this desire to experience something new.
Absolutely.
And I think that's ultimately what Mark is getting at. It's not about saying don't go here or don't go there. It's about encouraging people to be more, discerning.
Be a little more adventurous with your choices.
Exactly. Be curious, explore, find those hidden gems. Don't just go to the same places everyone else goes to and take the same pictures for Instagram.
Speaking of hidden gems, I'm curious.
Yeah.
What's on your travel bucket list? Any places you're just dying to go?
You know what? That's funny you ask because I've had my eye on Bhutan for years.
Bhutan. Wow.
I know, right? It's just like this perfect blend of ancient culture, amazing scenery, and then they have this whole focus on mindfulness and well-being. It's very appealing to me.
Oh, I've heard it's absolutely stunning. And they're very careful about how they manage tourism there. It's all about sustainability and preserving their culture, which I think is amazing.
That's exactly what I've heard. And they have this concept of gross national happiness.
Yeah, instead of just like focusing on money.
Yes. They prioritize the well-being of their people and the environment. I just find their whole approach so fascinating, and I would love to experience it firsthand.
You've officially bumped Bhutan way up on my list.
Yeah.
It's inspiring to hear about a destination that's approaching tourism in such a thoughtful way, putting people and the planet first.
I agree. It's a good reminder that travel, when done right, can be a force for good. It can promote understanding between cultures and contribute to sustainable development.
Well said. It's like we need an updated version of that old saying, take nothing but pictures, leave nothing but footprints, for the age of Instagram. We've got to be conscious of our impact on both the environment and the local communities when we travel.
100%. Travel is a privilege, and we have a responsibility to make sure that the places we visit can be enjoyed by generations to come, right?
Absolutely. It's all about finding those destinations that speak to you, even if they're not, the ones you see all over Instagram. Speaking of which, we asked you, our listeners, to share some of your experiences with destinations that surprised you. Good or bad, we want to hear it.
It's always fascinating to hear those personal stories because it just reminds you that travel is so subjective. What one person loves, another person might totally hate, you know?
Totally. So let's dive into the listener mailbag. First up, we have Sarah, who was a little skeptical about Costa Rica.
Really? Costa Rica? That's interesting.
Yeah, she said everyone raves about it, and she kind of felt like, okay, it can't be that amazing, but she was wrong.
I'm dying to know what surprised her.
She said it was even more beautiful than she'd imagined. The nature, the biodiversity, just incredible. And the Pura Vida lifestyle. She was totally smitten. Now she wants to go back. It just shows you sometimes a place can exceed even the highest expectations.
It's like finding that perfect match. The travel soulmate. Okay, who else did we hear from?
All right, next up is David, who had a bit of a different experience in Iceland.
Oh, Iceland. Everyone's talking about Iceland these days.
I know, right? So he agreed that the natural beauty is undeniable, but he found the crowds and the prices really overwhelming.
Yeah, that's the downside of a destination becoming too popular too quickly. You kind of lose some of that magic.
Exactly. And he said he felt like he was constantly fighting for space to see the same things as everyone else.
I totally get it. It's like you're always looking over your shoulder instead of enjoying the view.
Right. Which is why it's so important to consider the timing of your trip. Maybe look into some of the less traveled regions.
Exactly. Sometimes the best experiences are the ones you have when you get off the beaten path a little bit.
Absolutely. Okay, one last message before we wrap things up. Maria wrote in about her trip to Pisa, Italy.
Pisa. It's funny, people usually just make a quick stop to see the Leaning Tower on their way to Florence or Rome.
I know. And everyone told her to just skip it altogether. Like, just look at pictures of the tower. It's not worth the hassle. But Maria, she decided to trust her gut. And she's so glad she did.
Oh, I love that. What did she think?
She said, yeah, the tower is impressive, but it was the rest of the city that really won her over. She said it was charming, had amazing gelato.
No, that's what I'm talking about.
It just goes to show you can't write a place off based on, what other people say or what you see on those top 10 lists. Sometimes you got to just go with your gut and see what happens.
It's about creating your own travel story, not just retracing everyone else's steps.
Well said. And on that note, it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive. We've gone from the beaches of Aruba to the streets of Sao Paulo, uncovering the truth about those overrated destinations and, more importantly, how to find those hidden gems that really resonate with us.
We learned that overrated is really in the eye of the beholder, right? And the key is managing those expectations, choosing destinations that match your travel style, and, of course, always being open to the unexpected.
Beautifully said. Huge thanks to Mark Walters for inspiring this conversation, and to all of you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, happy travels, everyone. And remember, the world is full of wonders. Get out there and explore.